A woman leading the charge, the war on drugs, and the US government's inability to fight it. We're not talking about Nancy Reagan's Just Say No campaign. This is Sicario. Sicario is a 2015 action-adventure directed by the incomparable Denis Villeneuve. This is the same creative genius behind Arrival, Prisoners, and Blade Runner 2049. It's written by Tyler Sheridan, who is a pretty good actor and a damn good writer and director. You know his work from Hell or High Water, Wind River, and the upcoming Without Remorse. Cinematography is by the best in the business, the person that I think is the best cinematographer of all time, period, and that is the man, Roger Deakins. You know his absolutely brilliant work from Blade Runner 2049, Prisoners, Skyfall, No Country for Old Men. Joe Walker cut the film. You know his great editing style from movies like Harry Brown, 12 Years a Slave, and Widows. Johan Johansson did the musical score. He did the music for Prisoners, The Theory of Everything, Mindy, and many, many more. So the talent behind the camera on this movie cannot be matched. Now let's get to the cast, who is equally stellar. You have Emily Blunt as FBI agent Kate Macer. You have Benicio del Toro as Alejandro. You've got Josh Brolin as CIA agent Matt Graver. You've got Daniel Kaluuya as FBI agent Reggie Wayne. And of course, the badass Jeffrey Donovan as CIA agent Stephen Forsing. So in the movie, FBI agent Kate Mercer is tasked to join a team of people trying to hunt down and take out the drug cartels. The team is comprised of elite special forces operators and CIA agents, so she's doing stuff that she's never had to deal with before. So can she hang with some of the best improvisers in the world, or will her conventional training hamper her and the mission? So as you guys know, when I talk about movies, I talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. This movie definitely has nothing ugly about it, so I would just be talking about the good and the bad. That being said, let's get to the good. So I'll be doing this review not as just a filmmaker, a film nerd, but also as a guy who served in the military for 10 years, who has a love for films that lean towards realism. That being said, this movie has one of the best opening scenes that you will ever see, especially when it comes to building tension and just being an all-around badass action piece. But this isn't your typical action piece. It's done in a very different way, and it really locks you into these characters and into the movie right away. It's just so damn good. The super taut musical score by Johan Johansson really just drenches this film in this oppressive atmosphere, and it's made all that much more better for it. All of the actors throughout the film look, feel, and move like actual military operators or trained agents. We're talking little things like trigger and muzzle discipline, communication, movement. It's just all there. I mean, they really knocked it out of the park. One of the things that I really enjoy about this movie is it brings some, and I mean some, of the harsh realities and the atrocities that these cartels are perpetrating on the people of Mexico and even the people on our side of the border. And that's something that a lot of Americans need to see. They're out of touch. They don't understand what's going on down there and how bad it really is. I know I've mentioned the tension once already, but man, the tension in this movie is just palpable. I mean, you can feel it. It's so thick with it. And what really helps is everything that you're watching is from the perspective of Agent Kate Mercer. So you're seeing things from a fresh perspective and from someone who has a good moral compass, someone who believes in doing the right thing. This team is made up of extremely aggressive, capable alpha males who really want to do things their way. When she brings up certain points which, are morally correct, they tend to clash. And I really enjoyed when they show that dynamic. And you even get to see what somebody from the other side has to deal with when they show things from the perspective of the cartel cop who's on the take, Silvio. I love the fact that they established that Kate Mercer is a very capable agent. She's highly trained, she's very successful, she really kicks ass. But when she does join this mission, she is such a fish out of water, and she's trying to understand everything that's happening and wrap her head around the laws and all that kind of stuff. Now, as someone who was in the military, the stuff that you deal with is almost never black and white. It's mostly gray areas. And this movie really personifies that from start to finish. Maybe even a little bit too much, because it's so realistic it almost feels over the top. And I think a lot of people would see this and be like, no, there's no way that stuff like that is happening. It can't be that bad. They have to be exaggerating it for the movie. When in reality, they are actually taking it easy on the audience, because if you know anything about the cartels, I've read a bunch of books on them, I've seen a bunch of documentaries and stuff like that. They are way, way more harsh than what is shown in this movie. One of the really interesting things about this movie is the juxtaposition of all these harsh realities coupled with these beautiful images. You have these huge wide open vistas, beautiful sunsets, you have these sweeping landscapes, you have these really tight detail oriented shots, you have dynamic camera movements. Every shot, every camera movement, everything that is done visually, it is motivated. There's never like just some superfluous shot that was put there just for style. Now don't get me wrong, these images are very stylish, but they serve a purpose. It's as a woman in a very male world. Benicio del Toro's Alejandro is one of the best new characters that I've seen in years. He's an extremely layered anti-hero that you want to really know more about. And you do get to know him a little bit, through tidbits of dialogue. And that's another thing, the dialogue in this movie is so good. Every single thing that's said serves a purpose. There's no wasted words. There's a lot of times where they don't talk at all and they just let the images speak for themselves. But the dialogue in here, man, it's I can't even talk about the dialogue because it's so good when they talk. And all the stuff that I've talked about already is basically in service of this huge story on an intimate scale. So yes, you have the war on drugs and troubles on the border and cartels and murder and mayhem, all this stuff. But everything revolves around just a handful of people and what they're experiencing. I really loved everything that has to do with all the tactical stuff in this. It really made me miss a lot of the stuff that I experienced in the military, and not just seeing the cool military gear and getting to use it and everything else, but the camaraderie and, serving a purpose and having a mission. And I love the fact that they show that even though every single person on this team is highly trained and tactically sound, no matter where they go, they're always a bit nervous, as they should be, because anytime you deal with people from the other side in any type of conflict, whether they be informants or liaisons from, the other service, or maybe you're having meetings with, the enemy, trying to sort things out and trying to come up with a truce or whatever, you never really trust anybody who's on the other side. And that comes through really well from a bunch of thoughtful, tight shots that show details from the perspective of the different people on the team, especially when they go to Mexico and they're on this escort mission and a bunch of other things that happen. You see a lot of little expressions, a lot of things where they're looking, and they show where they're looking, and then you're trying to figure out what are they trying to see, what's going on, is it going down, is it wrong? So there's a real sense of paranoia. The team is worried even though they know their shit, and you feel that right alongside them. Some of these shots in this movie, I can't even imagine the amount of coordination it took from the crew. I mean, there's these huge sweeping aerial shots where everything had to work properly where this convoy can get through. So they had to have the roads cleared, and then they have to have certain people that were in the shots, even though they're on the side of the road, that really adds to the tension and stuff. So I'd really love to see a behind the scenes documentary about how they did all this stuff. It's gotta be super interesting. And speaking of that convoy, I think that's one of the best sequences ever put to film, period. I've not seen anything this tense since the Russian roulette scene in Deer Hunter. And it's not just the visuals of it. I mean, it's a combination of everything. You have this slow, methodical pace. You have this really aggressive, slow moving musical score with these stingers and this really deep cello, and it's just menacing. Then you have all the chatter on the radios, you have people looking in certain directions, you have them getting their guns ready, everything just builds and builds and builds and builds. And when it finally pops off, even though it's really fast, it is so fulfilling and rewarding. And honestly, I could watch this scene over and over. Anytime that I see it, pop up on YouTube or on TV or whatever, man, I have to sit down and take it in because it's perfect. There's nothing like it. I love the pacing of the movie. It never lets up from start to finish. You have all these great subplots. They all tie together in the end, and they all add up to something very special. And there's this moment in the film where you see all of these immigrants being sent back to Mexico. And what's crazy is, if you look at the state of America right now, America's pretty fucked up. And a lot of people really don't want immigrants coming to America, and they are fighting it so hard, which I find really ironic since, America was founded by immigrants. We stole native people's land, and America is one of the biggest melting pots in the world, and yet we're trying to stop people from coming in. But getting back to the main point, things in Mexico are really messed up when these people are trying to get across to the border to a place where the government doesn't want them. Many of the American people don't want them. And what's crazy, at one point they show how well versed these people trying to escape from Mexico into America are when it comes to navigating the border, where to go, where to hide, when to go, not when to go, like all these different details. They know everything. So they've been trying to get across the border into America for a long time, or they have before and they've been sent back, and they keep still going back to America, whether it be to be with their family who are in the States or to provide for their family that's back in Mexico. And of course, these people who are just trying to come to America and work hard and take care of their family aren't making a lot of money. So it's a really hard life, and they do touch on that a little bit in this movie. And speaking of America being fucked up, they show a lot of stuff in this movie that show how shady we operate when it comes to, conflict or the war on drugs or whatever. And of course, they also show how messed up the cartel is too, so it's kind of a balance. The great Jon Bernthal from The Pacific and The Punisher also makes an appearance in this movie, and even though his part is not as big as the others, it's also very memorable, man. That dude can act, and he just brings a presence and a gravitas to everything that he does. I really enjoy it. I love Agent Mercer and Agent Wayne's chemistry. They really seem like a team. They really communicate well. A lot of it is nonverbal. They have certain looks and certain ways that they do things, and they've just been together through a lot of tough times, and they really care about one another. It's nice to see a movie where they really work on building the characters. They show characters in a nuanced way. They have layers, they have depth. Even though they're strong, they're also fragile, because human beings are just skin and bones, and it's super easy to kill somebody. And the third act is just amazing in every way possible when it comes to filmmaking, when it comes to the actual narrative and the story and some of the stuff that happens on the screen. There's a reason that even though this movie came out 4 years ago, people still talk about it. And a lot of the stuff that you see happen in the movie from the team's perspective, even though they're Americans and they're trying to fight the good fight and everything, they don't always do it in an ethical way, and at one point they do it in a really, really messed up way to where you're like, Jesus, man, I don't really agree with that, at least if you have a conscience. And that's the thing, this movie makes you question whether or not, if we use the same tactics, are we just as bad as the cartel or terrorists or whatever? There's even a moment in the film where someone likens our tactics and the things that we've done to what the cartel does. And if you look at our history, especially, the inner workings of the CIA and some of the stuff that the US government has sanctioned, they're not historically inaccurate. What they're saying is pretty spot on. It makes you think about collateral damage. What if the people that they're arresting or killing or whatever aren't there because they want to be? In some cases, of course, they're not going to be there because they want to be. They're there because the cartel has kidnapped their family, because they know that these people are in positions of power and they can skirt the system for them. And they tell them, look, if you don't do what we want you to do, we're going to murder your family. So get out there and do it, or they're dead. And the movie speaks volumes when it shows Kate Mercer in the midst of all these people, and she's the voice of reason, and she's bringing up these things that are morally correct, and she's saying you should or shouldn't do this. Have you thought about this? And they don't give a shit what she says, because that's kind of how the US government is, when it comes to operating in certain places and doing certain things. The politicians don't care. The military complex definitely doesn't care. And a lot of these politicians that are pulling the strings and telling the military where to go and what to do, they're in the pocket of these corporations, whether they be oil or pharmaceutical or whatever. So they're going to do what they need to do to keep these companies in power. And there's one scene in particular that Roger Deakins shot. It has the sunset, really, really beautiful, and then you have this really dark area at the bottom half of the shot, and you see the team start to walk into it. And as they're walking in, they're getting lower and lower into the darkness until they disappear. And I think that's a really great metaphor for the movie, for our actions, not just in the movie, but what we do sometimes overseas and what we do in the name of freedom and fighting the good fight. And directly after that, you have this amazing sequence where everything is seen through night vision and thermal goggles. It really looks amazing, and a lot of it is from the first person perspective, so it makes you feel like you're part of that op, like you're in there with the team, and you feel that tension. It's kick-ass. So that's what I thought was good about the film. Now let's get into the bad. The first thing, and I touched on this a little bit earlier, is this movie is really realistic. It's really gritty. It's really violent. There aren't a lot of scenes that have violence, but when they do have it, it's very shocking and very hardcore, at least for, the casual viewer, for the average American. So a lot of people are going to be turned off by this movie. They're not going to want to know more about, the war on drugs, what the cartels are doing, how they can help, fight it, at least at home. And that kind of sucks. But it is what it is. Some people just can't handle reality. And there's a lot of little touches that make it feel even more hardcore. For instance, at the beginning of a torture scene, somebody is carrying a big giant water jug and they're whistling "Hail to the Chief." So not only is it a commentary on torture, it's a commentary on America's use of it. It's a commentary how the government knew about it and came up with new phrases to make it seem not as bad as it was, like enhanced interrogation. And it's also a commentary on the vast majority of Americans who really were just apathetic about the whole thing. And as fantastic as this film looks, there are a couple of shots of some helicopters and military aircraft that you could tell were CGI. They're pretty good. In any other movie, they'd look really good. But in this movie, they just kind of stick out like a sore thumb because the rest of the movie, like I said, looks fantastic. And these look kind of like shit. And as realistic as this movie is, there are a lot of little details, especially when it comes to like the military stuff and the tactical stuff, that if you've been in the military, you'll notice and they'll throw you off a little bit, but you kind of have to just ignore them. Like them going to Mexico just to bring someone back to interrogate in America. We interrogate people wherever we have to. There's a lot more stuff, but like I said, it's not a documentary, it's a thriller. And at the end of the film, Alejandro's character does a lot of stuff that really, if you have a conscience, you're not going to like, even though you understand the reasoning behind it and what he's doing it for. Again, it makes you question, what's right and what's wrong. And if we do certain things, are we just like the people that we're fighting? Also, how did he go from being a lawyer to this badass, cartel killing assassin, especially in such a short span of time? They really need to go into that more because, it can come off a little too heavy-handed and a little too unrealistic. But having been to the military, I know that you can learn a lot of crazy shit in a very short amount of time, and you can get so good at it that it's just muscle memory. So while I can buy it, a lot of people won't be able to. So that's how this former military man feels about Sicario, but what is my score? Drum roll, please. 9 out of 10.